I'm delighted to introduce our first session with Aruna Bhaugeerutty from the Ashmolean Museum of Art and Archaeology at the University of Oxford, who will be discussing new digital collection ecosystem across the Oxford University Museums with me. Aruna, welcome. Give us a little introduction, both to yourself and also to the Ashmolean. It's known to some and not known to many.
Absolutely. So the Ashmolean is the first public museum in Britain, and the first university museum in the world. So it's got some heritage there. It was founded in 1683. And this is after Elias Ashmole, a wealthy antiquarian, gifted his collection to the University of Oxford. I do have a slide if you'd like. Would you like to see a picture of it?
Oh, I'd love to.
Yeah, if we stick the first one up, I've got an image of it. So there it is. So this is it's a museum of art and archaeology, like you said. It's got a collection holding of around 1.5 million items and counting. And these span from the ancient world to contemporary art. It has large collections of both Western and Eastern art. And then it also has some significant collections of coins, of casts, and also archival collections as well.
Well, enough to keep any of us intrigued for a visit, but also with your presence and telling us a little bit more about your role to expose kind of the digital backplane that's being created and that you're leading for the museum.
Absolutely. So what I should will tell you about is sort of put the Ashmolean in context in terms of where it sits within the university, if that's okay, if I give you a bit more context around that. So actually, if you pop I have another image, and what that shows you is the wider family of cultural heritage institutions that the Ashmolean is part of at the university. There it is. Thank you. So we actually belong to a family of, there's 3 other museums at the university. We have the History of Science Museum, which is housed in the world's oldest surviving purpose-built museum, and that was the initial site of the Ashmolean. We've also got the Pitt Rivers Museum there, so that's the collection of anthropology and archaeology. There's the Museum of Natural History, which contains geological and zoological, I can never say that word, specimens. And in addition to that, we have the Botanic Gardens, which is the oldest botanic garden in Britain, and the Bodleian Libraries, which is the largest university library system in the UK. So collectively, we form a division within the university known as GLAM, and that holds one of the largest university collections in the world, totaling over 30 million items, and that's objects, printed items and specimens. And so the reason I thought I would sort of give you that wider context, because actually that will sort of help explain a little bit about I wear 2 hats at the university. I have a dual role there. But the collections, in terms of our mission, they are there as a university collection to support the teaching and learning across the university. That's a really important mission to us. We also want to support research by students and scholars across the globe. And we have a really active public programme of exhibitions and events as well in each of those institutions, as you would expect from most GLAM sites. So, okay, you can take that image down if you like, and I can tell you a bit more about my role there. So thank you. So I'm lucky to have 2 different but very closely related roles at the university, and both of those roles have evolved out of a growing recognition of the importance of digital collections and DAM-related capabilities for the organisation. So at the Ashmolean Museum, I head up the digital collections department there. It's the newest collections department, and I think that's unsurprising given the long-standing history of that museum. And we're now a team of about 10 members. It depends on the number of projects we have running through the department, so it can flex, but we have around 10 at the moment. We have a core team there responsible for managing the museum's systems and services around the digital collections, and then we have project teams who are responsible for delivering the digitisation program, and then we have a load of research and innovation projects. I say that it's a strand that we're trying to grow where we can, and that's looking at things like you were talking about, the linking up, and how can we kind of look outwards as well as within the university. So my other hat is a strategic leadership role, and that is in the area of digital collections for the division across the museums specifically. And there I oversee the development of the strategy and thinking around the division and its digital aims. And my biggest role so far has been supporting the transition to and from major programs of digital transformation activity. And I'm going to be talking about one of those projects, one of the largest projects that we've done to date. And I'll focus largely, when I give you examples, on the Ashmolean's implementation, just because that's the one I've been most involved in. But this has been happening across the museums.
Great. Well, thanks for that context and for the setting and the introduction to the big picture as well as some of the particulars. You have been involved in quite we'll call it a systems project for lack of a better word, but it is to enable a much more digital affirmation of accessibility, opportunity, connectivity. Share with us a little bit about the project that you just referred to, please.
Absolutely. So at the Ashmolean, and this was over 5 years ago now, actually much more than that, probably about 8 years ago, we had a fantastic digital strategic ambition to publish and manage and share our collections, get them all. I mean, our strategic ambitions are still the same. We want to digitize all of our collections, get them all online, make them accessible for teaching and learning. But it became increasingly apparent that we needed a much more robust and scalable infrastructure to manage our physical and digital collections to achieve that ambition. So I have another slide if you'd like to see that the systems that were involved in a project that we decided to set about doing to sort of help us build that infrastructure. So if we get that on the screen, thank you. So we have 3 systems I'm going to talk to you about now, a suite of 3 systems kind of in scope of our thinking at the time. We had, at the Ashmolean at least, we had a system that was around 15 years old. It was locally installed, it was highly customized, and we felt it wasn't really fit for purpose. So that was really a big catalyst for wanting change around our digital collection systems. In terms of dams, we didn't have one. Our previous attempts to publish our collections online highlighted a growing need for that, though. We had a growing number of collections images, and we had colleagues having to trawl through the file server to try and find what they needed, if they could get onto the file server at all. We had to manually create derivative versions of every single image we wanted to use for the web. We had a very traumatic server crash, another big catalyst for wanting change, which led to decades of beautiful studio photography of collections being lost or corrupted. And I'm saying all of this, and I don't think it's that unfamiliar. I think there'll be lots of people kind of nodding that I expect, across the sector, kind of nodding their heads, going, yeah, we've all been there. And so both of those things were definitely a catalyst. But the other thing was, and a big driver, because we wanted to get our collections online, and that was such a strategic ambition, was that our platform that we had to do that was designed for thousands of objects, but it really wasn't scalable for our ambitions of digitization. And at the time when we started thinking about what we wanted to do and how we were going to deliver it, we were working to a major strategic target at the Ashmolean of getting 25% of our object collections online in 5 years. And so for a collection of 1.5 million, you can see the scale we were talking about. And so that was what sort of, that kind of picture is what sort of precipitated the thinking that we needed a major project to kind of get that infrastructure in place. And at the same time, I mean, we're very lucky that we sit within this university and university structure, because the university was developing its own digital strategy in parallel. And they issued an IT development fund for the divisions to apply to. And it took us some time as a division to articulate our digital strategy collectively as a division. But eventually we were able to secure investment from the university for a GLAM digital strategy, what we called a GLAM digital strategy implementation program. It's a bit of a mouthful. But this program, one of the major projects that came out of that was what we call the systems project. And I think it is probably the largest, as of yet, largest completed implementation. I mean, I say completed in inverted, there's always a long tail of these projects, but it's the largest project we've rolled out to date, I would say, across the museums through that program. And the business case was to develop an ecosystem involving all of the museums. And it was focused on preservation, care, and access to our collections. And that's quite important. I have another slide just to kind of give you a sense of the scale of the project, if you want to pop that on, if it's of interest. And this is really to show kind of, it gives you these are our institutions. We have 4 institutions. We're looking at multiple systems in each of the institutions that are talking to each other and collectively talking to each other as well. So we did it in a very specific way that suited the needs for us. And this process was actually, and this investment, I think, is quite unparalleled in the sector. I think in total, people often ask me, how long and how much, and I say, and it's a bit of a back of an envelope, but I think it's probably an investment of over £3 million, and probably a journey of 5+ years to get to where we've got to. And some of these aspects are still being rolled out at some of the museums. Many actually who weren't necessarily interested in replacing some of their systems or any, and then saw the benefits that the others were gaining, or the potential of the systems that we were looking at, and then decided to jump on board. So that was really great to see that journey and how we've all kind of come along that journey together. And what it's done, I hope, is provided us with a really strong digital foundation for our incredible collections. You can pop that slide down now if you like. Thanks, Ed.
Aruna, how does word get around? What kind of governance structure enables the journey? We'll start simply with that question because it can unfold in many directions. What opens the journey to someone saying, "Hey, we've heard about this, we're interested in it," and then maybe against that, the more formal backplane of governance that was articulated, as I'm sure, as part of the submission documents and part of the ongoing monitoring that you're doing today?
Yeah, good question. So because we rolled it out as part of the university's sort of IT capital fund, we followed quite mature sort of program and project methodology. And in a way, at the time when we first started on this, we were thinking, wow, this is quite labor intensive. You have to come up with a comms plan. You have to get these governance structures in place. Actually, they were fantastic, because what it meant is we thought through those questions. I mean, I'm not saying we got it right first time, and they evolved as the project evolved. But stakeholder engagement is really important. And yes, getting the right boards and committees and the right people on those boards and committees who can make the right decisions at the right time and at the right level is also incredibly important. So a lot of the project and the way we rolled it out, and we were very lucky again, we've got our IT sort of services centralized team who then were bought out and worked with the division here for many years to help us deliver this, who brought those skills with them. And we've learned a lot. We even in terms of project methodology, we use an agile kind of rollout kind of methodology, which we weren't used to using. Actually, previously we'd largely used waterfall methods and all sorts of things. So in terms of project and program methodology, we did put those boards in place. We did have communication plans, and then it was about just making sure that the stakeholders involved, and people like myself who understand the culture of where I work and the people and who do what they do, kind of making sure that shapes how those decisions get made, and who forms part of that stakeholder map, and the best ways to reach them, whether it's an informal workshop, or is it a coffee morning, or is it a formal presentation. And so there's no one right answer there. We kind of we came up with a plan, and we implemented it, and we changed it where it didn't work along the years.
So an interesting question. A colleague sent an interesting question. Do you have a split reporting line that includes for you, and I'll say for you and for this project, from a broad governance point of view, interpreting the question, both on the, we'll call it kind of IT operational system side, and then the strategic lead that I know is the role you centrally occupy that goes more towards management, strategy, entity goals?
I do now. At the time, and we can come to that a bit later in terms of when I kind of talk you through the journey, but if we have time, that is. But because I think we could talk about this all day. But actually, when I first came onto the project, it was largely, there were 4 museums. We were working it out together. The Ashmolean had a bit of a larger team and a more kind of bit more of an infrastructure that we could articulate. So it was a question, and I happened to be working there and start initiating those discussions with the other museums. So a lot of the kind of cross-museum conversations were informal in some ways, but they became interesting when we formed that program structure. because then suddenly you have a board where you have members from every museum, and actually program level, including the libraries and gardens as well, sitting around a table discussing what's necessary, either at program or project level. But at the time I was full-time Ashmolean and working there. And over time, and this is when we talk about the transition at the end of the project, there was a realization that structures had shifted, communications and governance channels had needed to shift as a result of this project. And that's when we start talking about transition. And that realization led to then the creation of a role, which was for me was initially 2 years as a secondment, but has now become a permanent role where I report into the divisional registrar for GLAM and the museums, as well as my separate reporting line straight into my director of collections at the Ashmolean as well. So yes, I do have a dual reporting line, but that's many years later actually. So this is part of that transition process.
What are some of the other evolving roles that have come along in terms of, as you've looked at your colleagues and staff, the staffing that is like, oh, if we're going to do this, we need a that. And describe a little bit about the transition from the project to everyday museum operations, because I'm sure the complexion of the talent who are your colleagues has evolved. I know it's evolved from our conversations. So
in terms of during the project, after the project, or a bit of both? Would you like me to sort of talk you through that?
Yeah, maybe a bit of both, and maybe a bit of where, if we had a chance to talk in February of 2025, a bit of where it might be going too.
Sure. So
on the talent here.
Absolutely. So I don't know if it helps if I kind of I will get to answer your question, but if I roll back a bit and sort of talk through the stages of the project, because we went through a multi-phase kind of approach. I actually think I do have a slide around this. It might well be the next on the slide deck. Yeah, okay, here we go. So we have kind of different phases of the project, and that led to different teams being kind of brought in at different times. So the definitions phase was really to allow us to fully understand and gather our requirements and support the procurement process. And so for requirements gathering and procurement, really, it was largely using, me and the team that was already there at the Ashmolean, and the same could be said of the other museums as well, and existing museum members of staff that weren't within my team, but across the museum, because what we were trying to do was capture the needs and workflows of different functions across the museum. So these were people who were already working in areas of collections management, curation, conservation, exhibitions, design, press, front of house, you name it. We wanted to work with them actually to start off with. So at that point, the project staff were a project manager and a business analyst. And that was the beginning of the project team. And then when we moved over to procurement, we carried on with those members of the team. And that was when we were developing invitations to tender for suppliers. That's when we were coordinating the shortlists and interviews and demos and showcases and user trials and all of that. And that's where we really benefited from the IT services business analysts and colleagues kind of helping us put those kind of practical things together. When we embarked on the implementation phase, which is that second strip in my slide, that was a different thing, and we realized we needed more people. We needed bums on seats. We needed people who understood data mapping, migration, data audit, and could have that specialist knowledge to be able to configure the systems, develop training and documentation around that. And so that's where we brought in an implementation manager into the museum to help us prepare specifications for the supplier, or testing the mapping as we move content between new and old systems, holding workshops with our colleagues across the museum to understand, is there any other information that we don't hold currently that we should be, and all of that. And we were lucky there that we got the project funding to pay for these project posts, and they had assistants as well who were preparing data for migration or auditing the assets across the museum and gathering them and seeing what we could do to kind of identify and consolidate and standardize, ready for ingest into the new systems. So there was all this preparation work happening. And again, that would involve conversations then with our photo studio, with our picture library. So it was very much a hub and spoke model. We had project team members who were generic project professionals. Then we had these project posts that came in who were digital collections professionals. And then we had the rest of the museum who were professionals in their own right. And we needed to make sure that what we were going to be building was going to work for them. It's got to be a workflow. So it was a different layers of teams involved in many ways. We obviously work really closely with the suppliers, and they were incredibly important in part of this kind of team as well, making sure that their product roadmap aligned as well, and making sure that process was managed as well. So I don't know if that gives you a sense of, and I won't even, service transition is a whole different beast, in that what we were able to do there is make business cases again. And I was very fortunate that we made a business case that was successful. We got strategic funding from the division to say, yes, we've got these roles in who implemented this. If they left, it'd be completely detrimental to the progress we've made. These people have got the skills now, they've developed the knowledge around the systems and the collections, and now we've got these systems in place. They don't run themselves, they need to be maintained and developed. So we were able to build a case to keep most of the project team members that we brought in for the project to then continue into service roles, which is a really important aspect that I think often gets forgotten, which is why I put that third bit on my slide to say, don't forget the bit at the end of the project. It's so important. It's so easy to not think about it, but actually if you can bed it in from the start of a project, it will pay dividends, I think, as you kind of progress through. Did I answer your question? I hope I did.
You did, and more to boot, more to come. In terms of looking at the talent pool that you've accrued, the roles that are discharged from the team, I'll call it the team, but are discharged. If we were to be talking a year from now, it's almost Valentine's Day 2025. Are there emerging personnel needs, talent needs that are like, this is going to be important to us, that you can reflect on as coming kind of, well, we'll say, sort of down the road?
It's a good question. So if I kind of step back from my Ashmolean role and think about my divisional one, so the thing that we've been doing in my role is sort of leading that transition out of the project, has been doing a lot of service modelling and looking at the skills gap. We've been very lucky. We've managed to retain a lot of the project roles, but what are the roles that we still don't have? And we've been lucky. We've managed to get some business cases through and get roles that are jointly serving two different museums if they've got the same system, for example, which is a model that we're not used to doing. Now we've got roles sitting between museums on systems, and I think that's a wonderful thing actually, because it shows how we're starting to share and learn from each other in a really great way in terms of building a community of practice. So the skills gap is one thing, and we've had roles evolving. So my role clearly evolved through this into a strategic leadership role. I had a CMS dams manager who became a vendor manager across the museums, because we needed one single point of contact when we're liaising with suppliers about contracts as well, and service level agreements. We've retained roles, as I've mentioned, and we've also reviewed gaps, found some additional roles where we can, but there's always going to be more. And we keep doing, we always investigate. It's about continuous improvement. Once you've got something in place, you keep looking at what the needs are, and they will evolve, I think, as an organization evolves around you as well. The other thing I was going to say is governance structure is another one that's really important there, because my first task was to sort of put one in place post-project. And again, that's very much a collective and continuous effort to embed a service. So we have two groups, a systems managers group that my vendor manager chairs, and then I chair the service owners group. We have leads assigned in every museum who meet. We meet every month, and we talk through the issues and the needs. So what I would be saying in answer to your question for the future, I think they will emerge. As we continue the conversations. We're still rolling out elements of the service. So we're still sort of in transition phase. We're not in like a fully fledged end of project clean line yet. Maybe we never will be. We'll see. But I hope we will be. That's the whole point of a project. It's got to end at some point. And then you kind of, you start to absorb stuff as part of usual operations. But there's some essential features that we've got now. We've got a web-based system with APIs and preservation backups, but I'd like to see how we might be able to build on those capabilities now, improve our interoperability, not only within the university and between museums, but also with the wider world. So some of the projects we're looking at now around linked data and other methods which will enable us to really leverage the content and the assets, and they are assets, aren't they? They're valuable. What can we do with that to enable research and engagement? So I think on top of kind of continuing to evolve that community of practice and that infrastructure that we've got, I think we need, we're developing things around monitoring of the service and dashboards to help give us more insight to then think about what we need as well. We've got plenty of roadmaps of stuff that fell out of project scope that are nice to have that we would like to build in, as well as some must-haves actually that have emerged over the 5 years as well. So I think for me, it's about kind of looking at the next step of what do we want to say is digital transformation in 5 years, think about it, and then kind of move towards it. And I think for us, it's about as well making sure that we can continue to scale. We're going to keep digitizing and we want to scale up our digitization. So how are we going to make sure that we've got an infrastructure that's robust for that? How are we going to make sure that we provide what we need to for our audiences as their needs evolve and become more demanding naturally and rightly so. And what are the gaps we need to fill around preservation, interoperability, and research, even AI. I know that's another one that everyone's loving at the moment in terms of thinking what the potential is there as well as worrying about it. And I think we need to be bedding that into our practices. So I think in terms of the future possibilities, I think having this infrastructure in place is opening up all those doors.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'd use the word loving an AI in the same sentence, but something in AI in the same sentence. It's an opportunity, a conundrum, a challenge.
Absolutely. It's really fun talking to people about it as well, because there's such conflicting views. And it's about then, thinking what are the opportunities, what are the dangers, and how are we going to navigate that? But we have a wonderful community of practice now that can think about these things for the division in a way that we never had before.
Yeah, that will continue. I think one of the interesting things in listening with you as we've talked over the last few weeks and today about leadership is about understanding how somebody keeps moving the digital fence posts.
Absolutely.
And in a museum setting that has the longest legacy of any museum in what would we say, the United Kingdom, and one of the oldest in the world, and especially in its stature and breadth, that there can be kind of an intrinsic tension between stability, the diffusion of knowledge, and now so many new ways to diffuse knowledge in a large institution. And in that context, an interesting note sent along. Aruna, where do you turn for your own continuing education, and so that the leadership you're providing, that you have professional input? That's a lot of what brings us here today. And I thought that was a pretty interesting question someone sent in.
That's a great question. I think the learning never stops. And I think, especially when you work in this area, there is always some really interesting, there's almost too much good stuff happening. And I think that's a great place to be. And so I think it's coming to events like this, learning from your peers about what's happening in the sector. This is why I'm really keen to sort of build our research and innovation strand of our department, because it allows us to experiment with things like linked data and learn from it, and learn from others who might have skill sets that we don't have. So I think it's about collaboration and kind of keeping an eye out, attending events, talking to your peers. I think that, I'm sure there's other things, but those are the ones that come to mind.
Go back to what you just said a moment ago about the innovation, and I'm not remembering the second word, but the testing area. Unpack that a little bit, please.
So we have occasional collaborations because we're based within a university. We have wonderful departments around us doing brilliant things. So if we use AI and image recognition, we actually partnered up with, they're called the Visual Geometry Group. They're based in computer science, or Department of Engineering, I think, and computer science. And we worked with them to deduplicate our assets before we migrated them into the dams. I think when we first did our audit, we had about 3 million. After the project, we've got lots still to go and ingest into the system, but we really brought down the number because it was able to find exact matches, and we could and the better one, and we could just discard, because we knew that human error and history of layers of file exchange had led to all of these duplicates, but you couldn't tell through I or from file names because people were obviously rename things for their use. So we use that technology. Shock horror. Maybe we should get a DAMS. So we collaborated in that way to then in a way that we wouldn't be able to in-house because we didn't have a skill set like that. But we used their tools, and their open source tools. We passed it through our network of content, and we were able to. saved us probably years of work. So that's one example. Another example is, so just yesterday we had our colleagues from Yale University and Edinburgh University over delivering a symposium at the Ashmolean, because we've just finished a research project that was funded by the AHRC, and that was around converting our data from our systems into linked art format, to see how this might enable improvement of scholarship around exhibitions. Very specific subject matter and a very specific aim for that project, but we wouldn't have been able to do that if we weren't able to leverage the content that we have in the way that we have through this project, whether that's consolidation and rationalization of assets or the systems to enable that data exchange in and out.
Nice. Just to duplicate a little bit of language, funded by HRC, and that acronym stands for?
Sorry. So that's the Arts and Humanities Research Council. And actually, it was a joint funding with the NEH. That's a US funding body, isn't it? Endowment for Heritage.
NEA, perhaps, National Endowment for the Arts and Humanities.
Okay.
So it's, unless the acronym has changed, so.
No, I'm terrible with acronyms. But it was a joint funding thing, and it required a US and UK collaboration. And I think that's a really nice example there, how you can really benefit from widening your community and collaborating together to solve problems. We were able to provide some really interesting data, and they were able to provide some technical expertise to help us kind of do that transformation that we wouldn't be able to do in-house. So those are the kinds of research projects that we work on. We had another student sitting in the department for a few months who was funded by ESRC. I know you're going to ask me what that stands for, Environmental and Science Research Council. I'm probably getting all of these wrong. I think I've probably got it wrong. But another research council. Well, let's go with that. And they were with us as part of their PhD. We were like a placement, and they sat within our team and they were looking at our content within our systems, and the project was called Decolonizing the Database, and they were thinking about ways we might be able to build content warnings and to enable trigger warnings on our online collections through our systems and the way we store our collections and tag metadata against them. So again, there's a whole host of possibilities. Once you've got the structures and the foundations in place, there's many conceptual and academic questions that can be answered, or at least you can attempt to answer in a way that you wouldn't have been able to before, I think.
Well, it's such a delight to hear a project of digital enablement at scale, and also to have had the investment in the professionals that are, such as yourself and your colleagues, who are bringing this to life and its continued evolution. I think that's one of the things in my opening remarks that certainly is a then and now question, where we have too many of our peers who are being judged in their roles by a job description from 2001 or 2004, 20 years ago, and thinking, wait a minute, listen to what Aruna and her team are doing. This is not, we are back in some part of collections management or a library or something and discharging roles in the rear view mirror backwards. And I think that's what is so important in the initiative that you're helping to coalesce, to lead, to continually define.
Thanks, David. I think you're totally right, though, that this is not, people think about digital transformation, I think it's a technical project. It's a cultural one as well. And that takes time. Yeah. Yeah.
And we've had our time, unfortunately, our 30 minutes. So on that very clever remark of yours, on behalf of Henry Stewart and the Gathered GLAM community, thank you so much for your leadership. Look forward to hearing from you again in the near future.